Welcome back. Firstly, let me apologise for the way I'm filming this video. With the way the world is at the moment, I had to make a few temporary changes. But let's continue. The career of the self-titled California Klaus Kinski Nicolas Cage is a bizarre one. There are some really iconic and historic roles. However, there's also a lot of weird stuff that makes you wonder just what the hell was he thinking. Mandy, on the other hand, is something a bit more unique, and without giving the video away too much, something truly exceptional.
Mandy, no relation to the Barry Manilow song, at least not that I'm aware, is the brainchild of director Panos Cosmatos, son of George P. Cosmatos, director of the second Rambo film and Tombstone. And considering this is Panos' second ever film, this review should tell you he is one to watch out for.
As a reviewer, I want to tell you everything there is to know about Mandy. However, as a massive fan of the film, I also want you to watch Mandy completely blind because it is such an experience. So, go do that. You go do that, and I'll start the video.
The two things that are integral to Mandy is the 80s and music. And thanks to Elijah Wood's production company logo, Spectravision, it immediately gives us that 80s feel. And the music part is given in a rather appropriately morbid quote. "When I die, bury me deep. Lay 2 speakers at my feet. Wrap some headphones around my head and rock and roll me when I'm dead."
It's morbid, firstly because it's about death. But also, although the film doesn't credit him, those are the last words of Douglas Roberts, a man executed by lethal injection for kidnapping, robbery and murder. Which lets you know that the world of Mandy is dark, twisted and brutal.
We start with a slow flyover of forest with the song Starless by King Crimson playing, which is a great song. However, it is also significant because Starless appeared on the album Red, and we shall be meeting our main character, Red Miller, soon.
Also, before we truly get started, I will warn you that there's going to be quite a bit of interpretation of what things might mean in this review. Usually, I hate that kind of critique, because it's meaningless nonsense made up for someone's pseudo-intellectual jollies. But, having explored Mandy quite a bit, I can confidently state that not only is it more than the sum of its parts, but it's specifically designed to be that way. Mandy, however, can still be enjoyed at face value, unlike its art house peers, which can only be enjoyed if you understand exactly what the director was thinking last Thursday in between his morning coffee and midday shit.
And to continue the theme of a brutal, death-filled world, we then move to a logging operation in progress, and we meet one of the workers, Nick Cage, as Red Miller. And it's clear this man is not exactly living his best life. Cage just exudes angst and torment without even saying a word, just with his facial expressions and things like refusing a beer from a colleague.
And it's hard to tell if that was intentional, mainly because Nicolas Cage's 14-year marriage came to an end at the start of filming. Cage admits that those feelings went into his performance, which certainly adds to the authenticity, but I just don't know if they're supposed to be there.
As Red drives home, we get our first glimpses of the titular Mandy, who's smoking some weed and then creating some frankly incredible drawings. Drugs are a big theme of the film, as they'll be shown and used many times.
And I think the film is neither condoning nor advocating their use, more just commenting on the people who use them.
As Red continues to drive, we get a title card of The Shadow Mountains and the year 1983. And it feels like Red is moving from the brutal real world to the Shadow Mountains, a place something more peaceful and, dare I say, mystical. The soundtrack also helps give this mystical feeling as well.
And that soundtrack alone is a great reason to check out this film, being so unique and evocative and perfectly fitting any of its situations. The recommendation is slightly bittersweet as the composer Johan Johansson died shortly before this film's release.
Red gets home and instantly we see a connection between him and Mandy.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Eric Estrada.
Eric Estrada who?
Eric Estrada from Chips.
Because if you want to show a convincing relationship on screen, you don't need them professing love for each other and passionately kissing under the moonlight. Just show their crappy jokes which only they find funny. That's a real couple right there. Later in bed, with quite the psychedelic lighting, Red and Mandy talk about the universe and what their favourite planets are, with a script addition from Cage as he picks Galactus as his favourite planet, which, as we all know, is not a planet.
Yeah, but he eats planets.
I stand corrected, I guess. And we see the night sky is full of brightly coloured nebula, kinda showing how we're not strictly speaking in the real world anymore. Also, is it just me, or does it look like a pair of eyes? After establishing these two as a pretty authentic couple, we then see the more typical movie-style romance stuff, like how they spend time on a boat, and at night, by the light of a fire, Red watches as Mandy emerges from the water naked. And it doesn't feel pervy, it feels, if I may use this word again, mystical. You can just see how much Red is in complete awe of this woman.
There's a true loving connection between these two characters. They've barely said anything to each other, but we can already feel what they feel for each other. It's a perfect display of show, don't tell storytelling. So when it's eventually and tragically disrupted, we feel the full weight and impact of it.
The next morning, Mandy has what I choose to believe is a vision, because we don't see her leave or return to the house, as she walks through the forest and finds a dead baby deer, signifying that her tranquil paradise with Red will soon be coming to an end. And this unease prompts her to tell Red a story from her childhood. And the following sequence is an uninterrupted, slow-zooming, 5-minute long shot of the two as Mandy recalls a story about how her father tried to get her to kill baby birds when she was a child.
It's an incredible piece of acting from Andrea Riseborough because there's nothing fancy about it, just her telling this story. And you can really feel her trauma as well.
The next day, Mandy reads a book, Seeker of the Serpent's Eye, our first reference to serpents, which I'll explore a bit later. And the section we hear Mandy read has some relevance to what we're about to see. Firstly, this passage.
Under the crimson, primordial sky,
And secondly,
it glowed from within. A ghostly emerald light.
both we will see throughout the film. Mandy goes for a walk, and just as the book says, the skies and the whole film becomes crimson.
In the fading light of the blood-red suns.
Blood red, you might say, which heralds our main antagonists arriving, as a creepy group in a van drives past Mandy, one of them taking a particular interest in her, as the film gives us their name, the Children of the New Dawn. The film then shifts to the children in a motel, and their leader, Jeremiah Sands, is listless and demanding.
What's interesting about Jeremiah Sands is that originally Panos Cosmatos wanted Nicolas Cage, who had a long white beard at the time, to play him. According to Cage, Cosmatos said the film is about old age versus youth, which I personally don't see in the finished product. But thanks to Cage wanting to play Red, and through the help of Elijah Wood, the film is as it is now.
Jeremiah is the leader of the Children of the New Dawn cult, and he's a pretty typical cult leader too, demanding and narcissistic, as one of his sycophantic followers, Mother Marlene, tries to please him.
Everything you do is wrong.
Jeremiah is pretty obsessed with Mandy, wanting her for his collection of followers, and he's determined to get her, calling for his right-hand man, Brother Swan, seeming pretty unhinged as he does it.
Okay.
Jeremiah tells Brother Swan to bring him Mandy, and of course he's all, yes sir, 3 bags full, sir. And then Jeremiah asks if he has the horn of Abraxas, as we see it bathed in seizure-inducing green light.
And this is where I take a rather large tangent to talk about Abraxas, because I really don't think it's an accident that the film chose that word. To explain.
Abraxas is a Greek term found on amulets and carved on gemstones from about the 1st century BCE until about the 3rd or 4th century CE.
Abraxas is connected to Greco-Roman numerology, similar to the word abracadabra, because the letters in the word add up to a specific number. Abraxas in this case adds up to the number 365, the same amount of days in a year. That's one of the reasons why it's considered so significant. Abraxas is also incredibly widespread, being found from Egypt to Britain and everywhere in between.
However, and I am getting to my point, Abraxas was adopted by Christian Gnostics and made into a demon, otherwise known as the Great Archon, and in some interpretations partially responsible for the creation of everything. Abraxas ruled over 365 Archons, there's that number again, and 7 of these Archons rule over the planets in our solar system. Which links back to when Mandy and Red were talking about their favourite planets. Mandy chose Jupiter,
which in Gnosticism is ruled by the Archon Io, who is most associated with the Jewish Yahweh, meaning that Mandy most identifies with God.
Whereas Red first picks Saturn as his favourite planet.
Saturn, probably.
Yeah. Saturn's pretty cool.
Which is ruled by the Archon Deusdaecon. He's described as having the face of a lion, half flame and half darkness, which, if you remember, is the picture Mandy was drawing at the start. So we can assume that Mandy is the woman and Red is the lion. However, you'll remember that Red changes his mind and doesn't choose a planet at all, in a way rejecting the Archons and almost deciding to forge his own path instead.
But Deusdaecon is also quoted as saying, "I am God, there is no other God besides me." And I urge you to remember that for something later. And I'm sure you're thinking I'm just blowing a name way out of proportion here, but Abraxas is also associated with snakes and serpents, and I refer you to Mandy's book, Seeker of the Serpent's Eye. That, along with all the other references, means this has to be deliberate.
Anyway, Jeremiah wants Brother Swan to use the horn for what we don't know, but he also suggests offering one of their own in some form of sacrifice, so it's probably not good. As we're being introduced to the whole gang, there's also Sister Lucy, who seems to be follower/concubine for Sans. But it's clear she's more victim and prisoner than actual follower, making me think that Sans' obsession with Mandy is just his latest attempted conquest. At the store where Mandy works, she meets Mother Marlene and has a rather tense conversation, but unfortunately gives away her address.
I guess you live around here.
Yeah, we live just down near Crystal Lake.
Yeah, Crystal Lake. The reference to Friday the 13th and Jason is not lost on me. And it's a very deliberate reference, because Cosmatos got Nick Cage to watch one of the Friday the 13th films in preparation for this film. But more on that when it becomes more relevant.
That night, Brother Swan gets ready to perform the ritual. With a van full of slack-jawed onlookers, he blows the horn of Abraxas. And it's genuinely unsettling to hear.
One of the things this film likes to do is switch between the unsettling and comedic and then back again quite quickly. So, once the tension has been built with the horn,
there's a rather long sequence of Brother Swan getting increasingly irritated by the guy next to him messing with the window. Which, despite my grand extrapolations of the plot, is the film saying to everyone, hey, don't take things too seriously. And our moment of comedy makes way for horror, as the horn has done its work. The clearing fills with fog and the roar of 3 motorcycles and a quad bike, surrounded by that blood-red light once again. Brother Swan goes out to meet the Black Skulls, although by their silhouette you'd be mistaken into thinking it's an impromptu Slipknot concert.
As I said, these are the Black Skulls, and what they are we'll get into later. But I wanted to say how much I love their design, mainly because, for the most part, they don't really have one. Some are spikier than others, of course, but because they're all black and mostly shot in silhouette, that's really all they have, so it all adds to their mystery.
Brother Swan makes his pact with the skulls as the leader is given a jar of some viscous fluid which he drinks, and the black skulls state their terms. Back with Red and Mandy, they're doing some more relaxed coupley things, watching crappy movies and eating in front of the TV. It's actually really wholesome, and kind of funny how completely engrossed they are too. However, that night while Mandy and Red sleep, the black skulls appear, turning the night red as they do, and in the house, lights start flashing as they attack, subduing them both. Red is knocked out and a bag is thrown over Mandy's head. The black skulls also take the cult's sacrificial lamb.
The fact that he looks like a giant baby with the blonde curls just goes to show how entirely one note he is in his purposes to the cult. On top of Sans referring to him as a porker earlier, it's admittedly not very subtle and very over the top. But did you see the bondage bikers? I think we're past that.
Mandy is given the tied-to-a-chair Texas chainsaw treatment with Mother Marlene and Sister Lucy, who I suspect was the last person to go through this exact process, considering Mother Marlene seems quite an experienced hand and there aren't any other females. Mother Marlene assures Mandy Red is still alive and fine. A truth and a lie there.
The cult is fairly toothless, spiritually speaking, as in they don't actually have any kind of magic ability, for reasons I'll get into when they crop up. However, the film does add little things here and there just to make you doubt that assertion. For example, the Horn of Abraxas.
Mother Marlene uses some kind of narcotic and then an unknown stinging insect on Mandy, which seems to have an hallucinatory effect.
The fact that the bug is clearly some kind of fantastical creation and not a real insect adds to the mystical quality of the cult. Not enough to make you think these guys are legit, just enough to make you think.
So once Mandy is sufficiently drugged, she is given an audience with Sans, and Mandy's quick to understand what's about to happen when Sans asks what she sees.
See the Reaper fast approaching.
After proclaiming his love for the Carpenters, Jeremiah plays Mandy some of his own music, which is, as you can imagine, fully self-aggrandizing.
This is one of the biggest references to Jeremiah's real-world counterpart Charles Manson, who was also a musician, and just like Jeremiah, got very angry when you didn't lavish him with praise. You know, just in case it was unclear who Jeremiah was meant to be here.
Jeremiah then has a rather long monologue to Mandy about how he was chosen by his god, and as he does, there's a rather freaky effect where his and Mandy's faces shift and meld together, which to me makes it feel like this is Jeremiah's attempt at indoctrinating Mandy to his point of view. Things turn quickly when Jeremiah gets naked in front of Mandy. However, he doesn't get the gratification he was after, as Mandy laughs in his face defiantly, leaving Jeremiah quite literally impotent, who then has a bit of a breakdown.
It's quite the powerful scene because Mandy is tied to a chair, drugged up, and surrounded by religious crazies, and yet she still has all the power over Jeremiah, showing just how pathetic he really is.
Meanwhile, we see just how safe Red is as he's been crucified to a tree with barbed wire. And back inside, Jeremiah is having a bit of an emotional crisis.
Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do.
And I think it's significant that Jeremiah answers his own question.
Don't ever doubt yourself.
It reminds me of the film The Ruling Class and this quote.
How do you know you're God?
Simple. When I pray to him, I find I'm talking to myself.
But of course, Jeremiah is the scarier brand of that kind of insane narcissism.
Outside, Jeremiah speaks with Red, basically telling him he's going to kill Mandy. And he's so fragile and powerless against her that he needs to show off to a man crucified in front of him, as he gets Sister Lucy to play a bit of Russian roulette. Fortunately, she doesn't lose, but like everything with Sister Lucy, I suspect this isn't the first time. Brother Swan then shows Red a knife.
This is the tainted blade of the pale night, straight from the abyssal lair.
And that does show how full of shit these guys really are, because the Pale Knight, who is an abyssal lord, does kind of exist. It's from Dungeons and Dragons. So that just goes to show that these guys are pretty much making it up as they go along. Also, it's a nice reference to the satanic panic of the 80s, where people thought D&D created cults such as these.
And to complete the Christ metaphor, Red is stabbed in the side with a knife. He's then forced to watch what the cult does to Mandy, as they bring her out in a sleeping bag and douse her in gasoline.
And although you don't hear anything and you never see Mandy at all, the horror of what's happening is all shown on Red's face as he watches. The pain in his face and sadistic glee of the cultists is all you need to see, making it far more effective than any gore-filled screamfest ever could.
The cult leave after that, quite unceremoniously, with Red left for dead against the tree. And it looks like he's trapped there for quite some time, considering how terrible he looks. But he does eventually manage to free himself from the barbed wire. And unfortunately, or fortunately depending on how you see it, not much remains of Mandy, as she has been reduced to nothing but ashes.
Which is kind of surprising, as she would have had to have been at a constant temperature of 2000 degrees for over 2 hours to get like that, similar to a cremation oven. But even then, not everything would have turned to ash. But perhaps this, and the seemingly peaceful look she has when Red sees her face blow away into the wind, implies some form of transcendence.
Red makes his way inside the house, finding his shirt that Mandy was wearing, and as is customary with this film, the uber-serious tone is broken down with a comedic one, as on the TV, Red sees a commercial for Cheddar Goblin brand macaroni and cheese. And even Red can't seem to comprehend what he's watching.
If you're trying to figure out what the Cheddar Goblin means, it's not meant to mean anything. The scene is there basically to say, yeah, things have gotten pretty serious, but it's okay to laugh. It's okay to enjoy the rest of the film. It's there to break the tension.
Also, the Cheddar Goblin segment was directed by Chris Casper Kelly, who wrote and directed the very well-known Too Many Cooks short. Can't think of a better choice for a weird and creepy commercial. Arguably not the best thing for someone with heavy internal bleeding, Red then falls asleep. And we see an animated dream sequence of Mandy, who's now all zombified and maggot-ridden, waking Red up quickly.
Now, I don't know what that dream sequence means. However, one criticism I have of the dream segments is that this version of Mandy doesn't have her recognisable face scar. That would have really cemented the fact that it was indeed Mandy Red was dreaming about, because without it, she just looks like a generic cartoon woman. Maybe they removed the face scar for a reason, but it just doesn't work for me.
After waking, Red makes his way to an extravagantly coloured bathroom for arguably one of the greatest Nicolas Cage sequences ever put to film, as Red finds a bottle of alcohol and begins to drink, and it's in the bathroom because Red is a reformed alcoholic. I refer you back to the beginning of the film where he refused a co-worker's offer of a beer for evidence of that. So now, Red's pretty much off the hinges as he drinks and has a massive breakdown, screaming and shouting the entire time. It's no surprise Cage needed a scream coach for this. The scene is perfectly shot, with the camera left in one position, zooming in and out to see this man lose his mind, going from shock to grief and then finally rage. It tells you everything we need to know about what Red is going to do next. But first, he needs some equipment. Red travels to some sketchy looking caravans in the woods, and despite labelled "fuck off," Red knocks like he knows who lives there. The occupant, played by Bill Dukes, is also surprisingly welcoming, saying it's been a while. Red then asks for the Reaper, which we find out is a crossbow.
There's numerous pieces of dialogue to tell us about Red's past without really telling us anything. Like when Bill Dukes, named Carruthers, says that it's been a while and that the Reaper is exactly how Red left it, all implying at Red's violent past which he left behind when he met Mandy.
Another clue is when Red says he's going hunting, which seems to be an accepted euphemism between the two men, and Carruthers also gives Red some specialised bolts to use under one condition.
You put him to good use.
Carruthers then asks what Red is hunting, which he outlines pretty clearly.
Jesus freaks.
I didn't know they were in season, man.
Yeah, well...
Just tell me, man.
They lit her on fire!
Red also mentions the Black Skulls, and while Carruthers doesn't know the cult, he does know the skulls. Carruthers explains exactly what they are, emphasising it's hearsay, leaving us unsure if they are supernatural. But, allegedly, the Black Skulls were once a biker gang and courier for an LSD manufacturer, and this drug maker didn't much care for the skulls, so cooked up a special batch of drugs for the skulls that messed them up in the head. The scariest part of Carruthers' story is that the skulls are in constant, horrible pain, but
they fucking loved it.
So the black leather aesthetic, strange summoning ritual, and willingness to give and receive pain in equal measure might just be a deliberate reference to Hellraiser's Cenobites, which was also a product of the 80s.
Red has the Reaper, but he still requires a special tool of destruction, so he starts forging one, casting and hammering steel into the shape of a very ornate axe.
This is the Beast, and although the film never actually names the axe, I know it's called the Beast because it's written on the plaque, as I actually own one. It's slightly more form over function, but with a neat handle to make wielding it extra comfortable. It's a fantastic centerpiece for the film and a perfect representation of Red's rage forged into a weapon. Also, with the added bonus of it being a rather overt reference to the band Celtic Frost.
And then, at 1 hour 15 minutes of the film, we finally see the opening titles. It seems really random to have the titles there as opposed to, the opening, but I honestly believe they are there for a very good reason.
We're not told the name of the film until we absolutely and completely understand why it's called Mandy. So instead of the title just being a simple label, it becomes something far more important. Also, you'll find the first half of the film is all about imagery, metaphor, and it takes its time. The second half moves at quite the breakneck speed by comparison, which is by design because it's done building up towards the action.
As I said, Red starts his hunt, finding the Black Skulls. He's taken up a sniping position and quite cleverly eliminates the strongest looking skull first, possibly because he couldn't take him in a one-on-one fight. However, after shooting him off his bike, Red still needs to run him down with his truck to make sure and finish the job. This, unfortunately, gets the attention of the others and causes Red to crash. Red, presumably unconscious now, has another dream. We see a bizarre landscape with multiple planets in the sky and a glittering lake. We know Mandy and him lived near Crystal Lake, so perhaps this is a representation of that, as Mandy lies underneath the water, opening her eyes, waking Red up.
Still unsure about the dream sequences, but Mandy isn't dead in that one, so perhaps that signifies a change as Red gets closer to his revenge.
After waking up, Red realises he's been captured by the skulls, being chained to a pipe, and also his other hand is nailed to the floor. Again with more Christ imagery. The female skull starts out a conversation by pissing off Red.
That was my favorite shirt.
Remember that, it'll have a nice reveal later. Red can see he might be able to break free from the pipe, but he'll need some help first, as he gets the skull to hit him, forcing the pipe free, and then quickly makes his move.
You're a vicious snowflake.
Red quite wisely pulls the nail out. I know some people, me included, expected him to just pull his hand off. Red grabs a knife and a vest, ready to deal with some more skulls. Getting out of the basement, we discover just how murderous they are, as he finds the occupants of the house dead. And one of the skulls is enjoying a mountain of cocaine to make Scarface jealous, and to be perfectly honest, really boring pornography.
It is a weird thing to point out, admittedly, but it's just bizarre to me to see a guy who looks like Pinhead's gimp watching the tamest porn possible. But then again, maybe he's just making do. It is the 80s after all.
Red tries to sneak up behind him, but his reflection is caught in the screen and a fight ensues, with the skull pinning him to the floor. But Red just cuts his throat, killing him pretty quickly, as he's covered in the skull's blood, laughing as he does. Red by name, red by nature, I guess. The female skull soon comes back shooting at Red.
You're in my shirt! You're in my shirt!
See? Told you he'd be pissed about the shirt. Red quickly snaps her neck.
That shot of the neck snap was a suggestion from Cage, and it's a near exact recreation of the same shot of Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon. And extra bit of trivia for you, that was Bruce Lee versus Jackie Chan right there. And that reference to Bruce Lee is to show how much more of a ferocious fighter Red is at this moment, which is something that is about to change.
Red is full-on death wish doesn't give a shit mode, snorting a crap ton of cocaine. Unfortunately, he does retrieve the Beast and the Reaper, but then he finds a jar of liquid.
And it's this liquid I believe was offered to the skulls, the liquid the leader just drank down like it was nothing, which shows just how insane they really are, considering what happens to Red after a single taste. So now, Red has become like an avatar of revenge. Panos Cosmatos wanted Red to become like Jason Voorhees, hence the reference to Crystal Lake earlier. However, Cage chose to play it like the ancient Jewish golem, which was something that was planned out between Cage and Cosmatos together.
Red makes his way outside, finding the last skull enjoying a burning car. When Red fires a bolt into the back of his neck, it not only doesn't kill him, adding to the supernatural argument, but he just pulls the bolt out like it's nothing and doesn't even move from his spot. The Reaper didn't have any effect, but perhaps the Beast will have better luck, as Red and the Skull face off with each other. And I enjoy how we see each part of the axe used effectively in combat, like using the handle to utilise both sides of the axe at the same time, or the second blade at the back used as a hook, that sort of thing. Also, the skulls continue to piss off Red. So he quite rightly sets him alight for that. And while the skull continues to say "she burns" over and over, Red delivers the finishing blow. And as badass icing on the cake, Red lights a cigarette on the skull's head.
I really love that fight scene, however, I do have a slight criticism. As you can imagine, I really enjoy the Beast, so I may be biased here, but unfortunately, that is the most use it gets in the entire film. It's a big, iconic centerpiece, and it really only gets one big fight scene. Don't worry though, it does get more uses, just not another fight scene unfortunately.
Red doesn't know where to find the cult, so he visits the chemist, who you'll remember supplied the cult with the hallucinogens they used on Mandy. He's busy making some LSD when Red walks in. But rather than being hostile, the chemist, played by Richard Brake, recognizes him immediately.
Jovan warrior sent forth from the eye of the storm.
The chemist seems to know Red and Mandy intimately because he calls him a Jovan warrior. Jove is another name for the god of Jupiter, Mandy's favourite planet, and sent forth from the eye of the storm on Jupiter, which Mandy specifically says is her favourite feature.
Red doesn't say a word, but the chemist completely understands him, and because his pet tiger Lizzie is so calm, it means this is a good thing.
And interesting tidbit, Lizzie was originally meant to be a lizard, hence the name. However, Richard Brake showed up to set on his first day and was told, "Oh, by the way, Lizzie's now a tiger," which was fun for him, I'm sure.
Through some form of telepathic communication, or just being high off his tits, the chemist agrees with Red to free Lizzie from her cage.
Bye, Lizzie.
The chemist also knows the children wronged Red, and they both can see thousands of millipedes all over the floor, implying some form of supernatural connection between the two and Abraxas, if the millipedes are another reference to serpents. The chemist then gives Red the children's location, and we see Lizzie roaring in Red's dream world, possibly implying that world and the real world are colliding. Red travels to his target, and we see another dream, this time Mandy pulling a green glowing object from the body of a creature.
Firstly, the glowing green orb takes us back to the passage in Mandy's book, but also it's a reference to the film Heavy Metal, which also featured the same glowing green orb. So it's still hard to tell if the dream sequences mean anything, or Cosmatos just really likes heavy metal.
Red wakes up the next morning exactly where he started, at the site we saw him logging. But he's found the children, and in a rather ironic twist of fate, the work we saw he doing in that first instance of death we saw in this world is being used by the children to build their church, as Red watches the operation from above. One of the trucks leave, and Red has placed some caltrops ready to stop Brother Swan and Sister Lucy. And he doesn't waste any time grabbing and beating Brother Swan, shoving the beast down his throat. And it's significant that Red, even now in his kill-crazy frenzy, lets Sister Lucy go free. She was never part of the cult anyway, just another victim, as I said. One of the cult members is busy cleaning his car. Fortunately, he doesn't last long. And sadly, that's pretty much the last time the beast will be used. But don't worry, that doesn't mean there isn't any more badass fight sequences. Another member of the cult is whittling some wood, and Red decides to get a bit more extravagant, picking up a chainsaw. However, he has a bit of trouble getting it started, being noticed before he does, and unfortunately, the guy has his own chainsaw. And make your jokes here, because his is much bigger. Red defends himself despite not getting the chainsaw started, but he eventually manages it and takes first blood. Red is knocked down and his chainsaw thrown to the ground, but in a possible reference to Cage's past as Ghost Rider, Red throws a chain which wraps round the guy's neck, causing him to fall on the idle chainsaw, killing him quite spectacularly.
Now, of course, the obvious misstep here is that a chainsaw doesn't rev unless you're pulling the throttle. However, Red uses chainsaws a lot, so it's reasonable to assume that he could adjust the carburetor on the fly to make it run at speed while idle. Naturally, it's a weak excuse, but I think it's forgiven because of the rule of cool.
Red makes his way into the church, first casting aside their version of a Bible, and taking a passage underneath, finding tunnels below. Mother Marlene is waiting, and inexplicably tells Red all about how great a lover she is. But don't worry, they're not going to bone down. As the film quickly cuts to Jeremiah in his weird, pulsing meditation room, and is immediately taken down a peg by being thrown Mother Marlene's head. Jeremiah is arrogant even when staring death in the face, babbling about how he's the chosen one. Red doesn't say much, but he says enough.
The psychotic drowns where the mystic swims. You're drowning. I'm swimming.
That quote is the abridged version of "The psychotic drowns in the same waters in which the mystic swims with delight," from Joseph Campbell. And in his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Campbell discusses the idea of an archetypal hero and a monomyth, and also his idea of the classic hero's journey.
And that is the very essence of Mandy. It's like the film is deliberately designed to fit the hero's journey as closely as possible. The call to adventure is obvious. You have the help and mentor in Carruthers, the second helper in The Chemist. Red is literally in an abyss right now. There's plenty of death, and his rebirth will come soon. Also, he goes through a literal transformation when he tastes the skull juice.
It can't be a coincidence, especially with them outright quoting Campbell. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Jeremiah continues to ramble at Red, full of arrogance and ego, which falls apart when Red grabs him by the head, ready to kill him.
I'll blow you, man. I'll suck your fucking dick.
Which is a possible reference to the short story Killing Nazis by the Greek writer Nikos Kalpakis, where a character says the exact same lines while begging for his life. And as Panos Cosmatos is half Greek, that would make a lot of sense.
But even after breaking down, Jeremiah is defiant to the end, maintaining he has God's gift. And Red's final lines in the film cement his role as the god of Saturn.
I'm your God now.
But also emphasizes his similarity to Jason Voorhees, as Red crushes Jeremiah's skull, causing his eye to pop out in Friday the 13th style. Red finishes by setting the temple ablaze, driving off, and with his job done, he has time to reflect, remembering Mandy. We now see why his 22 shirt was his favourite, because he was wearing it when he first met Mandy. And in the car, Mandy is now sitting next to him. Whether it's really her, we can't be sure, but Red looks happy. At least I think that's happiness. And Red drives away from his dreamlike world, now fully manifest in the real world.
Under the crimson, primordial sky, surrounded by the jagged rocks of the ancient volcanic mountain.
So that was Mandy, and holy shit, what a wild ride it was.
I need to be clear, I loved this film before reviewing it. After reviewing it, I love it even more because of all the discoveries I've made throughout this process. It's nothing short of mind-blowing. I had no idea how deep this film could be, from topics ranging from Friday the 13th and Bruce Lee, to Christian Gnosticism to Joseph Campbell. It's crazy just how well it all fits together.
And because the film is so accurate to the hero's journey archetype, it makes it timeless as far as I'm concerned. And with it being set in the 80s, it has a very specific look and a very specific style. So I could see this film outlasting many of its contemporaries. Now, granted, I may be biased on that because I love it so much.
And on top of that, the performances are fantastic. This is by far my favourite Nicolas Cage film. And although he doesn't say much, his performance is perfect. It's crazy to me that it might never have happened. Linus Roach is also a perfect villain as well, being both over the top and menacing in equal measure. Everyone works so well.
I think I've made a rather effective case for why this film is so good. Do I need to say any more at this point? If you take anything away from this, it should be to keep a close eye on Panos Cosmatos, because if this is only his second film, there's going to be way more great stuff on the way.
Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to give a massive thank you to all my Patreon donators. Their support really does help a lot. And if you would like to contribute to the channel and gain access to the Deusdaecon Reviews Discord server, the link is in the description below. And if you would like to get more content aside from the reviews, please consider checking out the Twitch channel, where I stream live 5 days a week, 10 PM GMT, with subjects ranging from Let's Plays and discussions to also building this guy. The link is on the screen right now, so hopefully I'll see you there. And on YouTube, I'll see you next time.